I got you, and that's all I want. I won't forget, that's a whole lot. I don't go out now that you're in. Sometimes we shout out, 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 but that's no problem. I don't know why sometimes I get frightened. You can see my eyes and tell that I'm not lying. Look at you. Dum, 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 dum. You're a pageant. You're everything that I've imagined. Something's wrong. I feel uneasy. You show me, you tell me you're not teasing. I don't know why sometimes I get frightened. You can see my eyes and tell that I'm not lying. That's it. I'm done with that bullshit song. This is Invert the Y. Episode start out log Captain's log 12.1.5.9 and the USS Invert the Y is orbiting another planet of retrodom and bullshit. And today I got him back. I've got fantastic Phil, the scared one. He's come back in.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming, man.
No, thank you.
And thanks for doing another episode with me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no. I enjoyed the first one a lot. So, yeah, thanks for having me back.
You're the champion, man. Now, you know why I sang that song?
No. Oh, it was because I'm scared.
I was scared. Well, the reason why I sang that song, that was by Split Ends. I think it was released in 1980.
Yeah.
Right. Now, Split Ends are a New Zealand
Kiwi band.
Really. The
that
Finn
Australia
brothers.
have claimed. Is that true?
Yeah, I hate that shit when we claim stuff that's by New
Russell
Zealand.
Crowe, another, is he?
Yeah, another one. There's so many. Dragon's another band.
Oh, Dragon. We didn't talk it.
No.
Oh, I'm a bit of a Dragon fan.
I know you're a huge Dragon fan. Well, Mark Hunter was born in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And but they were predominantly an Australian band, but he's a Kiwi, and so were the Finn brothers.
Yeah.
From Split Ends. But the reason why I sang Split Ends, not one because I love them. I reckon they're a great 80s band. Awesome 80s band. But the real reason is that Split Ends, well, we're not sponsored by them today, but you know what? If you want to avoid Split Ends, try Schwarzkopf. That's right. Just like Split Ends, you can avoid any kind of drama with your hair, and that's to get Schwarzkopf shampoo. I don't have any hair, but I still use it. We're not sponsored by Schwarzkopf shampoo. I wish we were. Schwarzkopf. All types of body hair, or actual hair on your head, but you can probably use it on your body, who knows? Make it conditioned and fluffy. Lustrous. Schwarzkopf, check it out today. We're not sponsored by them. Now I'll hold this button down.
Arnold Schwarzenegger probably could have been a good vocal person for Schwarzkopf.
Was it you that used to do a decent Arnie impersonation?
No. No.
No. Can you do Arnie doing a Schwarzkopf?
Oh, God, I don't know. Come on, do it. Put on the Schwarzkopf.
That's cool.
Look at your hair. Do it to your hair.
Go ahead and give these people some shampoo.
Go ahead and get these people hair.
Awesome. Thanks for coming back, man. Appreciate it. So topic of the show is the one that we've been talking about for ages, and I'm going to need your help. I really do, because I'm no expert here. We want to talk about Bond. James Bond.
Yep.
Right? You're a massive fan of James Bond.
Yeah.
You have been for as long as I can remember. I personally could take it or leave it. I'll be really upfront with you on that. So,
yeah, that's fair enough.
But I wanted to talk to you about James Bond and go over what's going on in the current present day, but also what's been going on in the past with James Bond.
Yeah, because I don't think you've had anyone on.
Never.
Well, I like this podcast is that there's a good eclectic mix of nerdism, I suppose, and like a lot of things that the people have been on before I really enjoy, like your video games, your music, obviously we talked about that before.
Yep.
Cars, Formula One, whilst not being an expert in things like Formula One, but no one's really sort of brought up Bond and I suppose its impact, the impact it had on me
Yep.
and on movies and so forth. So, yeah, let's give it a go.
All right, let's go for it. Okay, so where do you want to start with James Bond, man? Where do you want to start? The books, where it actually originated, right? It originated with the Ian Fleming novels.
Yeah, I guess most people know James Bond, whether they like it or not. It's probably, God, it's up there with one of the biggest movie franchises ever. I think grossing wise, to break it down, it's probably seventh though, because a lot of, I think, like, you know, Marvel have come in just recently and smashed everything. Yep. Star Wars. I wouldn't be surprised if the Lord of the Rings is probably, from a franchise point of view, even bigger than that. But Bond has had that. It's definitely, as far as I understand, one of the oldest or longest running movie titles or sequences ever, I think. I mean, the first movie came out, 1962?
Right.
And, has been going, apart from a bit of a hiatus, has been going ever since. And there's the new one coming out at the time of this podcast that's coming out next year in April.
Yeah,
So,
we'll talk about that because there's a bit of bit of turmoil, a bit of drama behind the scenes. Well, at least with what the fans want to see from a James Bond movie.
Yeah.
But what I'm curious to talk to you about is the movies up to this point.
Yeah, I mean,
and the books as well.
Yeah, look, a bit like that other podcast we did. You know, music is so broad; you can talk about it for hours. And Bond's probably a bit of the same. And we've got movies that have been going for that long, and also novels, not only by Fleming, but there's a whole raft of books by other authors as well who have done books. So you can talk about that for ages as well. But it all started with Ian Fleming, didn't it? It all started with his novels, with Casino Royale being the first one, which has had actually 2 movies made of it. But most people probably, I don't know, it's an assumption.
Craig.
It was the first of the Daniel Craig movies that came out.
So you're probably going to hate me with what I'm about to say.
No, I won't hate.
No,
haters going to hate.
Haters going to hate. You got no hate in your body. You're a beautiful man.
Thank you.
No. What I was going to say is that I jumped into Bond probably around with Casino Royale with Daniel Craig.
Yeah,
and that I know a lot of people didn't like Daniel Craig for that particular movie, but I liked it only because, me being me, Daniel Craig portrayed James Bond in a way I always pictured James Bond to be, even though that's not how he was reflected in the novels. But I kind of wanted James Bond to be a bit of a badass, right? And be a bit mean. And Daniel Craig kind of portrayed that in Casino Royale, at least. And, you know, in that scene where he's in the bathroom and he's smashing...
It's the opening scene.
Yeah. And he's doing the running through the wall, and then he's doing all the parkour through the guy he's chasing is doing the parkour through the city there, and he just basically runs through a wall. I thought, man, that's James Bond in my opinion, but I know a lot of people don't agree with that because leading up to Daniel Craig, James Bond was always a bit more sophisticated. Am I right or am I way off?
No, I mean, look, I think the Daniel Craig interpretation of Bond, some people didn't like, I mean, the visual aspect of him because he was blonde, which again goes to against sort of the, I suppose, to really get into it, like Fleming's a bit different to how he visually looks. But definitely, well, that whole from Casino Royale and onwards was a reboot, a refreshing and a reinvigoration of where Bond was, because before that you had the Brosnan era, and that sort of ended on a really, well, that arguably in some of the Bond universe is the last movie that he did was a bit, well, could be argued disappointing.
Which movie was that, sorry?
That was Die Another Day. Die Another Day. That was in 2002.
Right.
So yeah, it needed a reboot, didn't it? Because in that time, remember you had the Bourne movies come out.
Yep.
And
Matt Damon.
Jason so Bourne. There was a whole, it needed a refreshing, bring it up to the modern era and so forth like that. So yeah.
Yeah, so let's go through the movies.
Yeah.
All right, because you've told me some interesting stories about the actors.
Yeah.
And so, what's the first movie that came out that was an adaptation from Ian Fleming's novels? What was the first movie that came out?
The first Eon produced. So, okay, a lot of the Bond movies have been produced solely by Eon to get, and they've had the rights for most of them and done them. They're the major block of it. They've done like the 2024 at the moment and about to release the 25th. So there was a weird TV show even before Dr. No that Ian Fleming signed the rights to, which was a weird American TV. I actually haven't seen it, but it was only like an hour special. But the first real movie in the canon, you could say, was Dr. No, starring Sean Connery, which was produced on a pretty low budget. They wanted Thunderball to be the first movie, but that the rights for that was signed away in another sort of rabbit hole of a story. But yeah, Thunderball being the first, Sean Connery, it introduced the classic theme song, the 4-note do 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 do. Yep. I think that was written by John Barry, even though it might not have been credited to him. Dr. No being the villain. It's set in Jamaica where the Ian Fleming lived and based himself and wrote a lot of the books. Some of the filming was done not too far from it. Ursula Andress coming out of the ocean as that iconic scene as well. So, yeah, it was done on a lower budget. It was quite raw. It follows the novel quite well, I feel. Like it actually captures that mood of that time. And it was... I mean, yeah, of course, this is a movie that's over 50 years, so you watch it now and it's dated probably a bit. But, yeah, that was the one that kicked it off.
And so the Dr. No in the pecking order for the novels, where does it sit? Because if Casino Royale was his first novel, what's Dr. No?
I think Dr. No is fifth. It's right down there. It's actually not...
So why would they have picked that as opposed to Casino Royale as starting off the movie franchise?
Well, Casino Royale... was actually, the right to that was sold to a David Niven movie that's a complete piss take. It's a spoof and it's quite awful. And it's actually been uploaded. That movie now has been uploaded onto the streaming service Stan, so you can actually go and watch that one as well. So, well, in my opinion, it's pretty silly. Yeah. But so it all came down to Ian Fleming, who wrote the books, was signing away movie rights because he actually intended to. He wrote the book. This is what I understand and I've read, that he wrote the books with the intention of them actually being made into movies. So there was sort of like that bigger picture, I suppose, from him. But in doing that, to get scripts or to get ideas to cinemas, he actually signed away. Thunderball was signed to someone, so there was a bit of trouble with that getting made into a movie. And Casino Royale, the first book, and they couldn't make it. They couldn't make that as the first movie, so they just chose Dr. No.
Right, so it's basically legal.
Yeah,
it's
like
a legal
reasons.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And so we go from Dr. No. Well, you know what we'll do? You've got this, we should say, you've got this, the DVD or Blu-ray box set of all the James Bond movies up until, including Skyfall, haven't you?
Yeah, Skyfall. So then Spectre is the most recent release. Yeah.
So what's after Doctor? So we'll go through the movies, if you like.
Yeah.
So what's after Dr. No?
We'll talk about the movies because the books are a whole myriad in himself, and there's a lot of other things about it. So From Russia with Love was the next one. Again, Sean Connery. That in my opinion, that's a really good. It's a really good movie. It's actually still, I suppose, in the early days, Cold War was a big thing, and the first few movies are a bit spy genre. They're a bit probably true to how with obvious, movie excitement and dramas and so forth like that. But From Russia with Love was another good one. So again, Russia was involved clearly in the title as well.
Yep.
And Bond had to assist a Russian agent to bring an artifact or an important documentation without spoilers back to the UK. So moving on from that one, then you had probably the next look. The one that one that a lot of people remember, I'm sure you know, is Goldfinger, which
Yep.
is the next movie.
Shirley Bassey was the singer. that
Yeah,
she
well,
sang
I mean, look, you've got the big that really came in with that big opening number. Actually, to me as well, it's got probably one of the best. Bond movies are known for their intros. You know, there's a formula that part of that formula hasn't changed over a long period of time, and part of that's because the same people have been producing it for so long. So some people might see that as a criticism because there's like it's not really adapted or changed outside of a mold.
Yep.
But then again, part of what I feel as well that's what's kind of nice about it, that it has been able to continue with those themes all the way through. And Goldfinger introduces with, I mean, look, Bond is all fantasy and it's escapism, but allegedly the scene where Connery came into a, it comes in a wetsuit, drops a bomb off, then changes out of the wetsuit into a tuxedo, looks down at his watch in a bar while they're all dancing around. And I mean, the watch he looks at, again, is another aspect about Bond, is all the gadgets
the product,
and everything.
there's
the
also
product
a bit of
placement.
product placement, yeah.
But this was an unintentional product placement, but he looks down at his Rolex, the big crown one, and looks at the time, and then bang, the bomb goes off. Everyone runs in chaos, and he just standing there suave, smoking, like smoking his cigarette. And then the Shirley Bassey song comes in, and you know what I mean? Like, it's big production, big budget at that time.
And that's the first movie that had that big production.
They wanted to break into America. So the first two movies were, the first two movies were in, the first one was in Jamaica and that kind of thing, a little bit of Europe. The second one was in Europe because they had a big market, big following that time. This one was like, look, let's go into the American market as well. So, and, Goldfinger introduced the Aston Martin to its proper, how we know, with the ejector seat,
yeah, right,
and the guns and the revolving. I think it even had a sat nav in it at that time in the 60s. And Connery really sort of fell into the role by then. He's and Goldfinger, tied as a villain. He's tying he's tying Bond to a table with a laser going at him. So the sort of the more. Is it campy? Is that the right way?
You know what I was about to say?
The over-the-top villain.
Yeah, so here's the problem, right? So I was going to say the one reason why I didn't particularly get into Bond until either talking through you much, much later or Casino Royale with Daniel Craig is because I always felt it was too campy. Do you know what I mean? It was always a bit too silly. And then you get like Austin Powers taking the absolute piss out of it later on, which is a 100% rip-off of Bond. But I guess that's kind of its charm.
Yeah, they're fans. They're fans of it. And you're right, like that the whole, as the movies go on and they've built up that repetition, the same sort of story, the same form. So people obviously loved it. But then, Austin Powers is
100%.
Actually, Austin Powers is one of the highest grossing spy movies out there as well. So it's classed as, so you've got your Bournes, your Bonds and stuff like that. I think the Mission Impossible series is classed as that too. But yeah, Austin Powers up there is a high grossing spy movie genre. So moving on, so Goldfinger brought in that elaborate, the villain, the over-the-top villain, and the ridiculously over-the-top, pointless, a giant room with a map that turns, comes out of the ground. And so who built that? Who built that prop? Why would the villain spend all that money and time to build? In this one, it's a bank vault that they want to break into and so forth like that. So over the top. Odd Job, the classic villain with the hat that he throws and decapitates people and so forth like that. So yeah, Thunderball, the next one, 1965.
Yep.
Again, big introduces Blofeld. He's one of his big main nemesis that actually they reintroduced and brought back out in the most recent movie, Spectre and so forth. Again, big over-the-top scenes. The budget was increasing. Sean Connery. I think Thunderball is a really good movie. That was one of the movies that had the problems to get off the ground because the rights were bought by another guy. But eventually the people who, Saltzman and Broccoli, got an agreement and they were able to produce it. And that was then Then Connery's last in this sort of sequence was You Only Live Twice, which I enjoy.
So what's he done by this stage? He's done 4.
Yeah, he's done 4.
Done 4 movies.
Yeah, I enjoy all the Bonds. I think all of them have their place.
Because I'm going to ask you what's your favourite Bond at some stage.
I'll get to that. I think all the Bonds are enjoyable for a lot of reasons, and what I hear from other people and other fans, each has their likes and their dislikes. But I do feel that the Brosnan era was a bit weak.
Yeah.
In saying that there's some positives out of it. But the last Connery was You Only Live Twice. Again, they went crazy big. Some really good soundtracks across all the movies, but some really good pieces of music in You Only Live Twice. That was set in Japan. Again, introduced iconic gadgetry with Little Nelly, this helicopter that Q brought over and packed up, and then Bond's flying around and shooting down helicopters with and so forth like that. There's a hidden, the classic villain hidden lair in a mountain that pulls back, that captures and takes rockets. So you're really getting into Austin Powers 60s territory. At that stage. And then that was Connery's last. And they, I guess, whether I can't recall whether he just, again,
he had enough, or whatever. You said you're getting a bit too. Because how old would Sean Connery have been in this era? How old do you know?
I think.
Do you think he was?
The Bond character was designed or sort of written as in their 30s, mid to late 30s type age, a bit war torn and ragged and
sophisticated and all that.
Well, Bond's original sophisticated, yes, to a certain point of view. Fleming used a lot of imagery in his books. Like, he used a lot of product placement, but not, again, for advertising, but to capture the type of style. Like, his aftershave to use, the cigarette brands he smoked and so forth. That was used to create the picture of who he was. But Bond was also, he is actually basically an alcoholic. And in the books, he struggles with a bit better that the whole fact that he is, at the end of the day, the license to kill is he's killing people, and the human toll of that, which the movies never really. I think they try and do that in the modern series a little bit, and you could say the Dalton Bond eras sort of brought that element into it, but really the movies don't. They do, obviously. License to Kill, and he's always killing someone in a movie. He's probably got a really high body count, probably up there with Schwarzenegger's body count when you think about it. Probably not that high.
Well, Nathan Drake and Uncharted.
Uncharted. That's horrific.
That's terrible.
But as the movies go along, they lose the sort of the aspect of what the books were, because Fleming had died by the time Her Majesty's Secret Service came out in 1969. And then it was really, taken over by... There are other books written and so forth by other people.
So, dumb question. Are all the movie titles, are they the same as the book titles?
There's a bit of a flow, yes, all the way through. The books ran out... Well, they stopped the movies based on the books, I think, at License to Kill, which was the Timothy Dalton one.
And they're not...
I don't think there was a book that License to Kill.
Are they chronological in any way?
Nah, not really.
And they don't refer to each other as a past tense thing. So whatever happened in, I don't know, Dr. No was never referred to again in a future movie or something like that.
And bits of the books you'll find incorporated into movies, but there's no chronological order. Like, there'll be some sequences in that side that will be put into some of the movies that just prop up, that are quite surprising when they were used. But basically, to my understanding, once Pierce Brosnan came in, they were all brand new stories pretty much.
Not Ian Fleming stories?
Not Ian Fleming stories. But they all use theories and terminology. Remember, they're produced by
the universe was the same.
The universe is the same, produced by the same people essentially, with different directors, of course, and cast. But the universe is still essentially the same.
Okay.
Yeah. Lazenby did... So Australian.
Oh, you got to tell me about this. These are cracking stories.
Well, yeah, Lazenby's interesting because he just sort of swaggered his way into. So yeah, Connery stepped down. And
so he stepped out. So he's done the Goldfinger.
Yeah, and it ended on. So Goldfinger, Thunderball, and You Only Live Twice.
You Only Live Twice. And then we move into what's the next movie?
Her Majesty's Secret Service, which they were looking for a new Bond and they were auditioning, well-known actors. And the story has it that Lazenby, he went and bought a suit that looked like Sean Connery. He never acted before, but he did. He's a male model, and so he did a lot of magazine publications and so forth like that. And he went and bought a suit exactly like Connery's. He had a Rolex, and he just basically rocked up to the interview and just swindled his way in. And he was, he fit the look, the dark-haired, tall bloke, and managed to get the role, managed to convince them that he was some kind of actor and so forth. And then he
was not an actor.
He never acted.
He never acted
in his life. There's a whole.
So he's a complete sham.
Oh no, I don't know if he's a sham.
But he was not an actor.
It seems very Australian that he can just like very, very Australian, to just rock up, mate.
Yeah.
How you going? And I can do this. Yeah, no problem. And just get the gig. And he got the gig. And I like Her Majesty's Secret Service. I think it's got a really cracky. Another thing we talked about music before, and you could probably, and people have. I know there's other podcasts out there. They talk about the music behind Bond as well, and there's been a lot of songs, a lot of things written, a lot of things associated with it are really iconic. And Her Majesty's Secret Service is one of the good soundtracks. But again, they're all John Barry. He's a very well-known composer and has a certain particular sound, and that all the sum of parts add into why I love it and why I think why others do. It just gets quite epic.
And how did he hold up as a James Bond in that movie, in your opinion?
I think you can see that sometimes the acting wasn't up to scratch. But I think look-wise, story-wise, it's quite good. Telly Savalas is the villain.
Oh, yep.
And I don't know, I never could take Telly Savalas very seriously. And there's lots of Bond girls who are now seem to be quite controversial in the modern age in that movie. But it is a bit of a silly story. But that's the one. That's actually the Bond gets married in this I'm spoiling it. He gets married and then there's she dies at the end of it, which part of that again is that sort of trying to show that he can't tie down, he can't do this job and be in relationships type thing because it's just too it's just the nature of an agent per se. Lazenby only lasted one movie.
What's the reason for that? He wasn't convincing. He didn't get
back then.
The reviews that people wanted for him to get in the studio, or was there? He just dropped out.
There could have been. They meant to sign him for either 4 or 5 more. They wanted to sign him. It actually, the movie did quite well, and they wanted to sign him, but he wasn't going along with in the interview process post. I don't think he handled the pressure, and Connery built Bond up already at that point to be an iconic in a certain way. You dress a certain way that. What people associate with Bond, the suave,
he's very suave, yep.
The womanizing, all that kind of stuff. He built that up. They built that up successfully already at that point. Lazenby didn't. My understanding was he didn't really sort of react to that quite well. Appeared on some interviews post talking about it. He let his beard go. His hair was long. It was starting to get into the 70s then, and he just didn't have the look.
So they expected him. From the studio's perspective, they expected the actor that played Bond to remain
almost in
character the whole time.
Yeah, like whether that's exactly how it went down, but that is the impression I got about it. But also that seems to be what I've researched and heard about it, that Lazenby just didn't really want to partake and continue in it. So he said no. He tore up the contract. It was worth a lot of money, and he walked away. And that was it. That was the Australian.
That's his
connection. There's never been a Bond Bond movie in Australia. I think that's the only really connection of Australia to.
No, but we had Mission Impossible too. That was awful.
That was pretty bad.
Yeah,
Mission Impossible. I think when you think about it, to me they got better as they went along, which is pretty rare.
Yeah, they have.
But anyway, that's another
topic for another day. So what happens after Her Majesty's service.
Yeah. Okay. So then they're looking around, and they I may have got this wrong, but Timothy Dalton was actually kind of in the running for to be the next Bond, who actually went on to be a Bond later in the 80s, right?
Yeah,
but he was either deemed too young or he was doing something with another thing. But
I was just about to ask a super dumb question. So we're in what, 1970?
We're from 69 to 71. So
Okay,
71 is when Diamonds Are. Sorry, I've completely missed it. Connery came back. Connery comes back for one more because they had a trouble with Lazenby.
Yeah, so Lazenby is a problem. He's dropped out.
So
didn't want to do another one. And so Connery's come back.
Connery comes back for one more within the Eon public production, and that's Diamonds Are Forever. So that's in 1971, which he was looking a bit older. And it's, you know, in terms of, I suppose, fans, it's not received as well as his earlier movies. It's soundtrack-wise, I actually quite like the soundtrack for it. Action-wise, it gets a bit silly. It doesn't really flow along the book as well, you know, using diamonds and that kind of stuff and moving that around illegally and criminally and all that kind of stuff. But so and then Connery went out on that last one. They moved on then to then who were they looking for? And this is where I think they were looking probably more for. I don't think Pierce Brosnan was coming in that stage, but they've been sniffing around Brosnan at some point. It might have been too early at this point.
I was just going to say, so both Timothy Dalton and Pierce Brosnan would have been quite young. Because you're talking mid-70s now, aren't you?
Well, yeah, so Roger Moore came into it in 70, so that movie came out in 73. So Roger Moore, as we know, came in to be the next Bond after Connery. Yeah. But I think Roger Moore was actually older than Connery. So,
really?
Yeah. So
he looked younger.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So, the more years bring in a more of a campy, a very, a suave, tongue-in-cheek. I actually am a fan of the Roger Moore.
I was just going to say,
some people don't like him.
I'm just going to put my cards on the table right now. Roger Moore's my favourite Bond, and I just said at the start of the podcast I wasn't a guy that really watched a lot of the movies, but the movies I watched tended to be the Roger Moore years.
Yeah, I mean maybe that's because that's when they were, you're shown on television. They were still relatively fresh when we were growing up.
That's what it could be.
They're only a decade old or something by that time.
Yeah.
But one thing, when you look back at the interviews of people the past Bonds who have played it, Roger Moore, you can tell he loved it. He loved being Bond.
Shit, yeah.
He loved.
He had a swagger, man. When he walked, he had a swagger.
He was a very suave man.
Oh fuck yeah, he was a suave motherfucker. That's what he was, because he had there was something about him, and the way he spoke was so eloquent.
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, because he came from the Saint. So I think he was signed up to be it. A lot of these guys, it seems they knew who they wanted early on, but either for whatever reasons, Brosnan was doing Remington Steele or whatever it is.
Oh, I remember that.
And he couldn't do it.
Yep.
Dalton was either too young, but he's a Shakespearean trained actor, so whatever, he couldn't do it. I think Roger Moore, they probably thought they wanted, but he couldn't do it because of the Saint anyway. And eventually they sign up for it. But no, I'm a fan of the Moore years.
So what movies are the Moore years?
Starts off with Live and Let Die. Paul McCartney doing the theme song. Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, Guns N' Roses did a couple. That would have been Paul McCartney with Wings, or am I wrong? Was that just solo?
Oh, it's solo. Yeah, it's Paul McCartney, I think it's credited as. It is with Wings.
Oh, man, yes.
Well done.
Well, fuck yes, I got one. I'm proud of myself for that. Sorry, I just pulled that out of my ass.
But, look, Jane Seymour.
Ding, ding,
Ring
ding.
it, that's
Right.
Jane Seymour is the Bond girl. And
Sorry, fantastic film. Sorry. Up until this point, was there always a Bond girl?
yeah, there always has been up until now.
Okay, that's important. We'll get to that later on. So there's always been a Bond girl.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's always been the formula of the Bond girl, and there's always been the I suppose the Bond girl who is murdered or killed off.
Yep.
There's always usually a side lackey.
Yep.
Felix Leiter might be the CIA agent. There's always someone who assists him. There's always been M.
Yes.
His secretary Moneypenny.
Yes.
Maybe not so much on the first few movies. Q as well. He's always had the quartermaster with all the gadgets. That came in, I think that might have been Thunderball. Q came in. So Q was played by the same actor for many years. Is it Desmond Llewellyn? So that's the same formulas, and part of that's again because the same people have controlled it for so long.
Yeah.
So so there's always been that part of Bond that's very familiar and really set in a structured way in the movies, in the Eon movies.
So what are we up to now? Fantastic film.
Yeah, Live and Let Die, and then Man with a Golden Gun that had oh my God, I've forgotten his name.
It happens when you do a podcast.
It's funny, isn't it?
You get a brain fart.
Get a brain.
Yeah, and people pick on me. They ring me up like later and they go, "Oh, you can't say a word, or you got that wrong." It happens when you try and do a podcast. It's weird. You sit down in front of a microphone and all of a sudden your brain just forgets. Whereas like normally it'd be off the top of your head so quickly. But we've got a little thing called Google and the internet these days, and we can.
I'm sure it's Christopher Lee. That's the
He was always a baddie.
Yeah, it's the villain.
Yeah.
That's what it is. With the superfluous nipples, so he's got 3 nipples. And he had the golden gun, which is probably he was paid $1 million a shot, and he's got a gun that's made out of cigarette lighter parts, and he puts it together, and that was his assassin's weapon. So again, it's bizarre, crazy stories. And the little guy, his little companion is the guy in Fantasy Island. You're the blade.
Mini me.
Yeah, mini me. So it's got that. And but yeah, more sort of, I suppose, getting into a bit more of his, the raised eyebrow and the suave voice and starting to settle into the classic Roger Moore years.
So do you feel that it is overly campy during these more years?
It's starting to build into that. Again, sometimes I think the more ones get a bit of unfair criticism, but you're probably going to find it's what you grew up on is what the ones you'll like with. And I know my first probably memory of a Bond movie is actually a Moore one with View to a Kill. I just have a memory of that being on television, and that's actually his last one. So
his last movie that he does is a View to a Kill. Okay,
but they're traveling around the world. So Live and Let Die was set in America quite a bit. And down in the Deep South, Man with a Golden Gun moved to Asia. I don't think they ever went to that point. So they're really starting to branch out on the exotic locations, which is another Bond trait.
Yeah.
Fast cars, the women, the action, and the exotic locations and the gadgets. Yep. The gadgets were starting to come into play. There's a whole world and a myriad world of gadgets and its offshoots with it, and product placement. So an example of that is the watches that Bond has had for his whole period of time, and it's been supremely influential on pop culture and in that community, like what watches he's worn and how they've sold. But so by this age too, they're starting to move into the digital quartz age, to go off on a bit of a tangent for it. So they left Rolex and so forth behind, which was never really an official sponsor back then. But by this time, Seiko had started to come into play. So you've got product placements and so forth starting to get into, and people sort of positioning to sell things, and that had started to come in more in the more.
So they're paying the studio ridiculous amounts of money to stick their watch on there. Yeah.
So yeah,
is that why you like watches so much?
It's part of it. I guess it's.
Do you still collect watches?
I'd like to, yes. That's another rabbit hole. That
Oh, dude, I reckon I could do a podcast with you just on watches.
Yeah, we could.
And
do
people
that.
that go, that is got to be the most lamest thing you've come
Boring.
up with, boring. Right, but I tell you now, I can't believe the science that goes into a watch.
Yeah, but
like an analog watch, you know?
Yeah. But bonds, they're actually a tool, and there have been in these movies. They're part of the plot. In Live and Let Die, he escapes from being tied up because his Submariner has the bezel, which is what a diving watch has to measure elapsed time for divers. But that bezel's got a blade on it, so that spins around and that cuts the rope that gets them free. So they're all plot devices, and a lot of the Seikos that were used in the Moore eras, they all had printouts and calculators and all that kind of stuff. So they were plot devices. The blah, 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 blah.
It happens.
Blah,
blah, blah.
Probably my favorite Bond movie you mentioned before is the next one, which is The Spy Who Loved Me. That's
what year's that?
1977.
And we're still talking Roger Moore.
We're still talking Roger Moore.
Okay.
I feel he hit his stride in this movie. It introduces Jaws, who is another iconic, for those who know, another iconic villain. So he's Richard Keel. He's very tall. He has the metal jaws as his weapon, and he's an assassin himself. And basically, he's kind of like a Terminator. Command the Terminator. He's kind of like that because he's just unstoppable. Like he just will still go, and he's huge. He's a huge villain. But The Spy Who Loved Me, Barbara Bach as well, who ended up marrying Ringo from the Beatles.
Ringo Starr, yeah.
She's, she herself is an agent, so she's, I suppose she's the main Bond girl in it. It introduces the Lotus Esprit, the iconic, probably the next biggest iconic car outside of the silver Aston Martin DB9.
The DB9 was the classic Bond car that I can recall.
And they're still using that car. They're still using the DB9 even up to this day in the current current movie that's coming out.
Yep.
As part of it as well. But the Lotus in a way, that's again product placement, because what it said is that someone who worked for Colin Chapman and Lotus in the UK deliberately parked the new Giugiaro designed Lotus out the front of the studio because it was such a radical design, the wedge-shaped design. That how Lamborghini Countach's had that sort of wedgy shape.
Yep.
So the Lotus Esprit had that. So they deliberately parked it out the front to get the attention of the producers to say, hey, look at this car, let's use that in the film. And it worked, and they got a Lotus Esprit coming in off Q delivers it down in Sardinia, another amazing exotic location. And though James Bond's racing around, with a Bond girl up in the hills and all that kind of stuff. And that's the iconic car that turns into the submarine that probably a lot of people know about.
Yeah. Was that the car you showed me before we recorded?
That's a different Lotus, Lotus Esprit. But again, so sort of a product placement, but it's a plot device as well. But I guess that was...
Well, everything had a purpose, didn't it?
Yeah.
In Bond movies, everything had a purpose. And even if it was a pen, it had some kind of purpose.
Yeah, that in a non-Eon produced Sean Connery Bond later in the 80s, Never Say Never Again, his Q gives him a pen that shoots a bullet.
That's right. I remember
Fatima Blush.
Well, see, I'm a layman here, man, when Bond. So I'm relying, you're the expert. But I remember watching a Bond movie and a very sophisticated, very expensive looking pen is handed to Bond. And he's like, oh, this is fantastic, whatever, but it's a bloody gun.
Yeah.
And the actual, the lid of the pen, that little sticky thing that comes down where you can put on your pocket, that's actually the reloading chamber thing. It's just ridiculous. It's so silly.
Yeah, I know. So, you're right. Like the gadgets, whilst there's probably there is an element of product placement, but they do become entwined and part of the culture and the lore of it all. But yeah, The Spy Who Loved Me as well has got that, it's the villain has an undersea, an undersea lab type thing, which even if, look at Team America, right? Every time I see, how Kim Jong-il, he's under the water and he's looking out and
Hans Briggs.
Hans Briggs comes in.
I hate that freaking guy. I told you before, I don't have any weapons of mass destruction.
So Hans Briggs, but he's looking out and there's a shark.
There's
and all
a
that
shark,
and actually, Hans Briggs ends up being eaten by a shark.
That's right. There's a little rag doll getting eaten by a shark.
Yeah, that's sort of similar to The Spy Who Loved Me with I'm sure it's Kurt Jurgens who's the villain in this one. And it's again over the top silliness. Jaws, the unstoppable villain who James Bond uses a magnet to eventually get away from him when the undersea world is collapsing, but he decided to not keep the magnet on, and that would have killed Jaws because he would have drowned. But anyway, he didn't do it. So to me, that's probably the peak of Roger Moore.
The Roger Moore years.
The Roger Moore years.
And that was, sorry, what year was that again? Sorry,
that's 77.
77. Okay.
So after that, Moonraker.
79.
And 79, yeah, spot on. And For Your Eyes Only. Moonraker got criticised. Okay, so Star Wars has come out by then, right?
Yep.
So what that franchise needs to do, adapts it, follows the trend of all the space movies. So Moonraker as a novel is very different to Moonraker as a movie. So yeah, they set it in space. They've done it in space before on You Only Live Twice, because there was the rockets getting kidnapped and so forth. They actually recycle a lot of the themes, a lot of the villains and a lot of the themes and so forth like that. But yeah, Moonraker's the space one. And it got really silly. Laser guns in space. Jaws returns in that. Again, I don't mind it. Drax, I think, is a great villain. The actor who played him as well. Yeah,
is he the guy with the gold teeth?
No. Well, Drax actually Drax ended up being in Ronin. Did you know that movie Ronin?
Yeah, I've seen Ronin. Yeah, that's with De Niro, Robert De Niro.
Yeah,
is that right?
What a tangent.
Yeah,
so Drax ended up being the guy who helps Robert De Niro when Jean Paul Reno they go up and take the bullet out of him. But so Moonraker just really took it to silly. I mean, it's been pretty silly before, but silly levels.
That was really silly.
Really
I struggled.
silly.
I got to be honest with you. That's probably I probably made mistakes trying to get into Bond because I probably watched the wrong movies to get into it. And Moonraker was one of the first early movies I saw.
Oh yeah,
as a kid actually. And I just remember, and I love space and science fiction and stuff like that. But I was like, huh? What? No,
this doesn't make sense.
This doesn't make any sense. So no, that was always the problem I had. I always thought it was just a really silly franchise, and that's my fault. But that was
it's not your fault.
No, because in retrospect, I kind of wished I had the knowledge you've got about Bond, because you know what I mean, because there's so much history with Bond, and I kind of ignored it.
Oh, look, I mean, how you get into what you like and what you don't like.
It's it's right.
A whole nother.
So Moonraker, do you, as a fan, agree with a lot of people that say it was a pretty weak movie, over the top, too cheesy, too silly for even a Bond movie?
It's very silly, but I do look. A lot of Bond movies I feel start out really strong. Like all of them start out quite strong, but then they just turn into a bit of a whole mush of a very long, drawn out end sequence. By then, especially the Moore years, always seem to have a big closing dramatic battle in a base that gets blown up.
Yeah,
and that gets tiring after a while. Soundtrack wise, actually, I think Moonraker's soundtrack's awesome. John Barry composed a lot of it. There's some really great. It's a good album to listen to just by itself from that point of view. So there's pros and cons of it at all. For Your Eyes Only was the next one, 1981. They deliberately tried to bring that back to earth with a bit more of a sort of a grounded storyline.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. Yes.
I had to do it, man.
Hasn't been done much this
one. No, it hasn't.
Really many jokes.
No, there's been no jokes.
So that brought it back to earth. I think that's even what they said on one of the the posters or something.
Because they copped a lot of backlash over Moonraker, didn't they?
I think so.
I think they must have.
again, another more. I think it's a pretty solid movie. Soundtrack wise, I really enjoy it. It's got a kind of a cool storyline where the Bond girl's parents are murdered, so she's on a vendetta to go out and kill the people who murdered it and so forth. And Roger Moore has to bring him to line and all that kind of stuff. Stunning locations down in Greece and so forth, and there's underwater scenes and all that kind of stuff. So the ending again is a bit weak, and the villain probably is a bit weak, but yeah. But Moore's really sort of, you can sort of tell that they're probably wanting to. Maybe he's at the end of his tether.
Yeah, because how many movies has he done now? 5.
He does like 7 in total.
Right, so he's right up to his 5th now.
Yeah, he does quite a few. I think he's probably the most.
He's the most. He did the most out of any other actor, didn't he?
Connery's done a few. There is that one that he did, which was not Eon production. That's whole nother story. Never say never again. But they did. Yeah, so. Between Moore and Connery, they've done the most. So the last two Moore ones are Octopussy and View to a Kill, and I think Roger Moore was probably in his 50s by then.
Yeah.
So even he said it was a bit creepy that the Bond girls that he was with, they're old enough. They were young enough to be his daughters or something like that. So that all got a bit weird and creepy. But look, View to a Kill. That actually has a young Christopher Walken as the villain. And Christopher Walken, I think, that sort of jerky, staticky way of talking, he probably wasn't too much like, I think as he got older, he's got that really quite iconic, funny way of speaking.
Yeah.
He sort of has a little bit in View to Kill. I think he makes one of the best Bond villains you can get with his portrayal. And that's funny. Bond is always another thing about Bond too. It's always adapted within its parameters. So that's the computer age, the silicon age. They're starting to silicon chips and stuff like that. So Max Zorin, who's a genetically engineered Nazi kid, wanted to blow up or flood Silicon Valley so he can take control over of the silicone chips or something like that, and completely that kind of absolutely
over the top stuff. Yeah.
But Grace Jones
again. Yeah.
I mean, when you think 80s iconicness female figures, Grace Jones,
slave to the rhythm. Grace Jones,
and I think she's excellent as a Bond antagonist.
I actually have seen this movie. Yeah.
Look, he's really looking old. It's a movie that I think starts out stronger than it ends. And so forth. So I think that cops a bit of a bad rap, View to a Kill.
So as a layman, that was my only thought watching Roger Moore, who I liked as a Bond, but I thought the guy's a little bit too old now to be rough and tumble as a spy, hanging out with all these younger women. It was a little bit weird. It was a little bit, you need to go out and retire on this one. I'm sorry, Roger Moore, as much as you're awesome.
He acknowledged it.
Yeah.
He says that. But again, going back to that sort of comment, you can tell that he really loved playing Bond, and he as he continued on in his life, he was always, you can always see he was one for expressing his enjoyment of that series. So they brought in Dalton for two more, which was controversial. Dalton wanted to bring it back serious, like to a more serious level in the 1980s. I actually quite enjoy the Timothy Dalton movies, The Living Daylights and License to Kill.
Yep.
I think the three, they've actually got pretty good theme, like intro musics as well. So Aha did Aha did A View to a Kill.
Just going to look this up, folks. We don't want to get it wrong. He's on a roll, though.
Yeah, Aha did The Living Daylights, and Duran Duran did A View to a Kill. So they're really using that, the modern pop songs quite well, I think, at this stage as well.
Because we're talking mid-'80s here, aren't we?
Yeah, so Living Daylights was 87, and License to Kill was like 1989 or something like that.
Okay, right.
So, but Dalton copped a lot of criticism and flack. He was too serious. He didn't, I don't know. He didn't have the pizzazz, I suppose, of more or what followed before it. But they're really quite dark and gritty. Living Daylights is sort of about heroin and that trade, and License to Kill about cocaine and drug dealing. And it's got some License to Kill's got some pretty brutal moments and action scenes in it as well.
Yeah.
So just skipping along, look, Brosnan's probably my weakest.
Bond.
Gold, just on a little bit of a tangent, and Bond seems to have transcended other genres. And I know you've mentioned this before on your podcast, but when you think of GoldenEye, I actually think of the GoldenEye video game.
On the N64.
And how important that was to video games, because I believe that's one of the most important first-person shooters.
That game, well, see, for the N64, it was probably the most successful game on the N64. And it was one of the very first, I'm not going to say it was the first, but it was one of the first multiplayer type split screen games.
Yeah. I remember playing it, and
a lot of people. Well, it might not have been the first or one of the first, but it was certainly one of the most popular in the 90s, because that whole split screen local player multiplayer game was mind blowing for a lot of people at home on a home console. So and that was a Bond licensed game, and I don't know about the Bond games actually. I don't know. That's another topic, I guess, for another game. Another day for the games that were licensed for James Bond. And I don't think there's a lot, actually.
There's a few.
GoldenEye's the most
iconic.
Most iconic.
Yeah. And I believe there's fans of even, I'm probably wrong, but who aren't really super Bond fans, but who really enjoyed GoldenEye as a game.
I know people that who knew less about Bond than I do and love that game. But have you played it? In recent times?
Not in recent times.
It's pretty bad.
Oh, is it?
I tell you, man.
It's nostalgia.
It's nostalgia. It's rose-colored glasses and shit. But you play that game in the modern world and you will not believe how bad it is.
Oh, God.
It's not... It didn't hold up well.
Okay.
But then again, I would say many games of that generation, like the PlayStation 1 generation and the Saturn generation and the N64 generation, that era... didn't hold up well because they used the 3D polygon type design, and it just doesn't look good, and it's horrible in terms of controls, and the frame rate's god.
I remember the controller being pretty fragile.
Oh, the N64 controller was awful. People are shit on me now because Super Simon's listening to this going, no, you're wrong, Retro Dan. It was superb. It was it was absolutely an amazing control. And I go, well, Super Simon, I agree. We'll have to agree to disagree. But I have played that game, not recently, but only a few years ago, and I couldn't believe.
It's just okay.
Yeah, it's not what you remember.
I will keep my memory of that.
Keep it as it is. Yeah, keep it a happy place.
Happy place. Like Happy Gilmore.
Think of your happy place. Don't ruin your happy place by playing that game.
Yeah, look, no disrespect. Look, I think there's a lot of good in the Brosnan years. I actually think his actual acting in his character is quite a good Bond as well. You know,
I'm a layman. I remember Brosnan being, at least in terms of appearance and the way he acted, I thought he was fine because he brought that suaveness, in my opinion, back.
Yeah,
that Roger Moore had.
Yeah, they wanted, as I mentioned before, they wanted him, I think, earlier than when they got him.
Yeah,
so they had their eye on him as playing the character, and he got four movies out of it. So the first two probably are the strongest in my opinion, but Die Another Day got really silly with invisible cars and strange tech and just over the top. Madonna did the soundtrack. I'm sure it was Madonna.
Would have been an interesting soundtrack for her to do.
Yeah. People out there might like it. To me, that's my least favorite. And I remember even in that time sort of losing interest, even when they were, that's about 2002, I think, when that came out.
Yeah.
I remember that just not even being that interested. But then it comes into the Craig era, which completely, was done as a
2006
reboot. 2006.
Casino Royale.
Yeah. So whatever license problem they had with, obviously, Casino Royale had been long gone. It's still the same people who produce. It's still Eon coming through. Barbara Broccoli, who's this daughter of one of the two guys who set it up, started it. Michael Wilson, another producer, is still involved, who'd been around for a little while. I think they did a great reboot, a rehash.
Yeah, well, again, I went in as a layman and I didn't realise that they'd never actually made Casino Royale as a movie, did they? That was the first.
This is the first true interpretation.
Yeah, exactly. So true interpretation of the very first Ian Fleming novel.
Yeah.
And Daniel Craig was the new Bond.
Yeah.
And I loved it.
Yeah,
because I thought Daniel Craig was what I always wanted Bond to be. Even though I liked Roger Moore as a layman again, I liked the sophistication and the suaveness that he had. But I always thought there was not enough of an edge to him.
Yeah.
Or any of these Bonds. But then Daniel Craig came in and he was suave when he needed to be, but then he was also very ruthless as well and quite brutal. And so I loved Casino Royale. I really did.
Roger Moore has been quoted as feeling uncomfortable about the killing side of 007, which does go against, what his character is. Like there's in For Your Eyes Only, he kicks one of the antagonists off, is in a car, kicks him off and pushes him over the cliff. And there was discussion on the set about how Roger Moore really did feel quite uncomfortable with that. So he didn't really laud that as his character. But clearly, obviously, Daniel Craig it's a completely, it's 2 decades away.
But see, that's how I imagine it. I mean, these guys are supposed to be spies, espionage agents or whatever you want to call them. Surely they're going to have to make a decision. If it comes to the crunch, they're going to kill people.
Yeah,
that's how
right.
I always, again, as the layman would interpret it as someone like that. And I always like the suaveness and that kind of side of things. But I like what Daniel Craig, how they either he put the reimagined it or the studio told him that's what we want you to do. But he came across in the way that I actually could understand better than the previous Bonds, right? Even though I liked Roger Moore, I understood Daniel Craig better.
They'll probably age.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and had the cheesiness sort of went away a bit. The campiness went away.
Yeah, completely
with Casino Royale. It sort of went away a bit, and I actually liked that. It was a bit more believable, which I know sounds crazy because you're still talking about them running through walls and driving fast cars and all that silliness, but I believed it a bit more.
Yeah, maybe the Bourne series had a bit of a impact on that because remember Bourne came out I think probably a couple of years before the first Bourne, and that was very widely successful or received. I can't remember off the top of my head if the second Bourne had come out by then, but that was really gaining traction into, and I know some people I know they were like very dismissive of Bond at points, and then were like, oh well, Bourne is shown the new way, and that
well, you know what,
back seriousness.
Well, that's the other thing too. Like that era, like the 2000s, action movies were very different to what they were back in the 70s and the 80s, right?
That's right.
Particularly the 70s and the 60s too, I should say. So they had to probably reinvigorate or reimagine Bond to be a bit more of an action hero, like your Bournes, your Jason Bournes. And I quite liked the Bourne series with that Matt Damon was part of, and that's why I like Casino Royale. I just felt that it was a bit more realistic.
Yeah,
I know it's not realistic, but it felt like it was more realistic.
Yeah, it is grounded.
But people didn't like it though, did they? Fantastic Filth. People were the true believers, the true fans were a bit. It was a bit polarizing, wasn't it? Initially.
Oh, look, I don't actually remember that much criticism against it. I think the main thing is that Daniel Craig just visibly didn't look like how historically.
That's what I'm picking up on. Sorry, yes, that was the issue. He didn't look like a traditional Bond.
Yeah,
in their eyes.
Again, I don't know. In my opinion, I think that because it's been running for so long, it's a franchise that we're seeing this in a lot of the movies at the moment that it seems to be getting changed. It's from what they historically were into a new mold that people are struggling with. Yeah. And I think Bond is a classic example of that exact franchise that people really struggle with, the core aspects of it dramatically changing.
Yeah.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it's been going on for so long and has obviously sold so many movies. Why muck that up? So obviously you got to move with the times, but if the core structure of it changes too much, then you're going to have a bit of a backlash.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as Bond doesn't have black hair. You know, that kind of, which, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a movie series, but people really do take that, you know, to heart. I like Casino Royale. It punches. It's got Lashif I think he's a great villain. The Bond girl Vespa, she's excellent.
Was the soundtrack by Chris Cornell?
So Chris Cornell did that opening
opening track,
that punch,
awesome.
that song really hits.
Yeah,
and, you know, cracks it in.
Yep.
Like from going from the Brosnan era. Say what you like about it. You know, from a Madonna soundtrack, Madonna, you know, theme song, having a bit of a break and coming in with a rock orientated track. It really,
dude. I can tell you, I can remember clearly. I think it was definitely you and myself and the Drunken Monkey. We went to the movies to watch Casino Royale, and I'll be honest, I kind of went along for the ride because I knew you were a big Bond fan, and he
Drunken Monkey's a big Bond fan.
He is too, yes, he is, but he'll always defer to you in terms of Bond knowledge, right? I think, and we sat down at the movies there, and then when the opening credits rolled, and the graphics looked cool too, with the whole, you know, the cards floating around. It was all animated. And then when the song started off and the Chris Cornell song started off, I'm like, that's Chris Cornell, man. And then immediately I'm like, this is now modernized. This is punchy. This is awesome. And I was quite cool that the credits rolled for a couple of minutes, and then bang, we're in a brand new era with Daniel Craig, and I was sold. I was cool with that.
It was it's, you know, arguably one of the better reboots of a series that's actually worked. I mean, I know we're hearing. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
We'll
Star Wars,
we'll get
Star
there
Trek.
at the end.
I hear about your comments about that on the previous podcast, but that Casino Royale reboot, in my opinion, I reckon that worked pretty well.
That's how you should do reboots.
Yeah, it's not perfect.
Yeah.
There's a lot of. I don't think none of these movies are perfect. There's things I don't like about it, but it did pretty well. Quantum of Solace followed that. Again, 2008 started out continuation on of Casino Royale into Quantum of Solace, you know, the car chase scene, all that kind of stuff just went so well. I even there's still things in Solace I do like. I like the villain. I like the, you know, the imagery, the scene, the locations to go to. But yeah, that weird ending. That weird sort of...
What was the ending all about?
The hotel and
in the middle of a desert,
no fire extinguishers.
Yeah,
it's almost coming back to the silliness of the of the original, you know, the earlier movies.
But it was not even the silly. See, the whole thing about the original movies was, in my opinion, as a layman, correct me if I'm wrong, that was the universe. The universe was campy, over the top, leave your brain at the door slightly, weird gadgets, suaveness, all that stuff. But the problem with Quantum of Solace is that it took itself seriously.
Yeah, if you take yourself seriously and
you're in trouble,
and then you go silly,
then you go silly, right? And not only do you go silly, you do a complete 180.
Yeah,
that made no sense. Like, there's a hotel in the middle of a desert, huh? What?
Yeah,
there wasn't at the start of the movie. They didn't explain that at the start of the movie, but suddenly at the end, we're all expected to know what this shit is.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? I just went, what? Okay. And that was the problem. It took itself a bit too seriously, in my opinion.
It it was a bit of a hiccup along the way. Look, Skyfall was the following one.
The next one, what, 2012?
2012.
Yep.
I only just watched Skyfall pretty recently, actually. I think it's okay.
It's a bit boring.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. You know what I'll say about Skyfall? I think they spent way too much time smelling their own farts, which to them smelt like roses.
Yeah.
And they loved all the imagery and all the lights and all that sort of shit when they move up to Scotland there.
Yeah.
At the end of the movie with them to try and protect her. And it's all beautifully shot, and it's all like very, the lighting's all wonderful and all that sort of stuff. But the movie suffered.
Yeah,
it wasn't a Bond movie at that point, in my opinion, I don't think.
Yeah, well, I suppose this is Sam Mendes, who's who did Skyfall and Spectre. So you're right. Like I've heard some people comment that they say that these are like art movies. The way
They got very arty. That's a great way of putting
shot.
it. Yep.
They're quite dull, I think.
They're dull, but at some points they use this lighting to really promote something, and it's all very arty and it looks very pretty. It just doesn't work as a Bond movie, I don't think.
Daniel Craig seems to have adopted a more, he gets shot at the start. Spoilers alert, little spoilers alert. He gets shot at the start, and then he recovers and pretends he's dead, and he's the alcohol comes into it again. I'm not quite convinced that Daniel Craig's Bond's an alcoholic, to be honest.
Why did they do that? There's no need for that.
Well, that sort of goes back to the core of the Bond character. He did drink a bloody lot, but I don't know. They seem to sort of make it in your face a lot with the Daniel Craig one that he's downtrodden.
Oh, yeah. You know what? Daniel Craig's Bond was downtrodden, tired, beat up, a thug. He's a bit of a thug. He's a bit cunning, a bit ruthless. He'd do whatever he needed to do to get the job done, even if that meant killing people. Whereas Roger Moore, in my opinion, was always clean cut, was above everybody else's station. He mingled with high rollers and all that sort of stuff, and he would not kill anybody because he was better than that.
Yeah, they played very, very different.
Yes,
and you've had a Bond in between Moore and Daniel Craig. Yeah, Skyfall. Moving on, Spectre to Skyfall as well. Similar tone, I guess, in that Spectre I thought was pretty disappointing.
I've not seen Spectre, so you're going to have to help me out on it.
Yeah. I won't.
No, you can spoil it because I know it's not what I have it from very good authority that I don't need to bother watching it.
Spectre brings back
2015, aren't we? We're talking 2015.
Yeah, Spectre brings back the character of Blofeld, and I don't know. I think did they waste him in it? I suppose. It was it's Mendy's dark. I suppose. There's not much color. Daniel Craig really did look tired. I think that's
you know what that's the whole point. So in Skyrim, he was. You know what the problem I have with it's not Daniel Craig. It's the changes within Daniel Craig, and I don't know if it's intentional or it was him. But Casino Royale, he looks like he's fresh.
Yeah,
he's got energy. He's ready to mess people up. All this sort of stuff. Skyfall, he's a bit more somber.
Yeah,
a bit more morose. I'll use that word, morose.
Morose.
That's a big word.
It's a good sounding word.
Morose.
Morose.
You know what I mean? He's a bit more somber and he's a bit more contained within himself. And then, from what I've heard with Spectre, he's like, he's tired. He's almost like a has-been. He's not really into it. That's what I've heard. I haven't seen it.
I'd agree with that.
You'd agree with that?
I think Christopher Waltz was underutilized as well as the main villain, and I think, I don't know, probably Bond is, at this point, if you could call it a criticism, it's sort of struggling to understand the script sort of goes that way as well, like where it fits in the modern world, where Bond fits in the modern world. And I don't know. I think it's actually it's okay. It's still got its moments. It's got some good imagery. It uses the car, uses the Aston. There's some okay action scenes in it. But
it'll always have those fast cars and the fast gadgets, and it really, up until this point, had the fast women. We'll get to that at
what's his name? But Batista's
Dave Bautista.
Yeah.
He was in the wrestling.
Yeah. And
the
Guardians of the Galaxy. Am I getting that name
right?
No,
it was Dave Bautista, and he was in Guardians
of the Galaxy.
Yes, he was, yes.
Yeah. I mean, he's a bit like a Jaws type, Terminator-esque, unstoppable villain.
Yeah.
So they're still reusing and sort of rehashing ideas.
Yeah.
And then, look, now we're sort of up to speed with No Time to Die, which is the next one that comes out in April 2019, which has had a troubled production, I believe.
Let's talk about it.
Craig, went on record to say he never wanted to be Bond again after Spectre. Something must have happened on that.
You know what?
He said he came out and said he would rather slash his wrist.
Mate, he has said some ridiculous things, and I'm amazed that he actually got the gig again, because he said stuff like, "I'd rather slash my wrist to then rather than do another Bond movie, it doesn't matter how much money they throw at me. All sorts of stuff. And you know what? People picked up on, again, I haven't seen Spectre, but people picked up on it that he just looked like a guy going through the motions, doing what he had to do to finish his time as a Bond and do something else, right? I think he even did an interview somewhere where he said he didn't want to be pigeonholed and typecast as Bond. That was his big fear. So he wanted to get out of there. So he's obviously somehow swallowed some humble pie, and he's come back and he's doing another Bond.
He walked away, probably took a respite maybe,
but it sounds like the thing's in chaos because I sent you a video last week about how there's some changes with Bond, how there's no traditional Bond girl for the first time, quote unquote, for the first time in Bond history. That's why I was asking you. Has it always been a Bond girl? Because I knew that this movie coming up in 2020 is going to be what they say is the first movie that they don't have a Bond girl in it, and he's actually getting married.
I believe it's kind of going against how I watch movies with the Bond, because I usually don't research, and I like going to a movie with knowing nothing.
Because I get disappointed.
Absolutely nothing about it. But this one, I've decided to read up a bit and take a bit of an interest in where it's going, because they say this is the first Bond within the Me Too movement, which is seems to be impacting a lot of the genres around at the moment. It's the first movie this time on set, allegedly it's like, and again, I'm no expert. I don't know any sources. I don't have any sources. I'm just reading from other material. So could be right, could be wrong. I'm just a fan of it, so I'm just putting in my opinion. There's the word Bond girl is not allowed on set, so there's a new change as well. Barbara Broccoli has come out and said, she needs to adopt. They need to adopt and move with the times, and has sort of quoted the Me Too movement. Bond's always moved with the times. I've always felt like within a varying degree.
Yeah.
I don't know though, and what I've seen, I don't know if I don't think or know it might be as bit of what's been reported to be the train wreck or it's going to bomb that it might have, because I think you've still got enough people who will go and see it and spend their money in the event that it is, and it's probably got enough worldwide captive audience. I think though that if they did muck around with the basic formula too much, knowing the history and knowing that it's been basically the same thing all along, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It could maybe go down the path as like what we've seen with other movies.
See, here's the thing, like it's very easy to jump on the bandwagon that say things are woke without actually having seen them at all. Yeah. Like we don't know really what this movie's going to be like.
No.
It's not out yet. It won't be out till April next year at the time of this recording. And so people are saying, well, it's following all these other movies that are currently woke because there's no Bond girl. James Bond gets married in this movie.
He actually has been married before. So he got married in Her Majesty's Secret Service. So that kind of thing.
That's what I mean. People jump on shit, right?
Yeah.
But then they're saying, well, she won't take his name because she wants to retain her identity. And people are running away saying crazy things about that. But you know what? I know a lot of women, particularly in business, that never took their partner's or husband's name because it was more convenient, especially medical practitioners, because they've got all these medical journals and all these publications they've written in their maiden name, changing their name's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
And what's in a name? So who gives a shit, right? And people are getting a little bit upset about that stuff, and I don't care about that stuff. That doesn't worry me at all. Not having a Bond girl, well, that doesn't really worry me either, because does it add to the story or detract from the story? Really? We know? We don't know. It doesn't worry me.
I think, the basic story premise is Bond is in retirement after the events of Spectre, and he's down in Jamaica. So they're teasing all these classic, Jamaica is actually the spiritual home of James Bond, where it was written, where the first movie Eon production was, and that they're teasing all these things and they bring him back out.
Yeah.
So again, it's got the exotic locations. Remy, I can never pronounce his surname. Remy Malek is the the villain.
He was Mr. Robot, and he did the Queen movie.
The Queen movie. So again, he's probably going to be good.
Yep.
A lot of the same cast are coming back as well. There is that controversy though about Lashana Lynch's, again, hopefully I've got that pronounced right, but her character. Whether this is teased by media to create interest, I don't know, like calling her like, the next black female Bond. Like, I wonder if sometimes this is done to just create any sort of controversy, because that any controversy is good controversy and so all of that. But whatever it says is that it's not going to happen. Anyway, we'll wait and see. But the designation of her character being a 00 from 007 to 001. But I do think that it would be a shame if somehow, I don't understand how Bond could not be at least as close to a iteration of how it traditionally was from day one, which is James Bond.
Well, there's a couple of things.
And all his elements.
I agree, right? There's a couple of things here to unpack, right? The first thing is from the actual source material, which is the novels written by Ian Fleming, James Bond was always male. He was always white.
Yep.
And he was always British, or he was from the UK.
Yeah, well, right? The Scottish ancestry, all that kind of stuff. But
that's where he was from, right?
Yeah.
That's the source material. If you tamper or deviate from that, you're at risk of being completely alienating the fan base.
Yeah,
you're at risk of doing that. Now, what happened with this movie that's coming up? From my understanding, is originally there was massive rumors suggesting that Bond would be replaced at some point, either after this movie or during this movie, with a female Bond.
Yeah.
A female 007.
Yeah.
Right? Now, when you start doing things like that, you are 100% tampering with the universe now, because whether it's right or wrong, there was always a male 007, James Bond. And I don't know, to me, I smell a rat. I smell the studio backpedaling, because a lot of fans of the universe, or the Bond universe, were really outraged to hear that potentially there might be a female Bond.
Yeah.
Because everyone knows that every Bond that was ever written in Ian Fleming's novels was male.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
so it sounds like to me there's been a bit of backpedaling, because now they're saying they're putting in a female agent, 011?
Yeah, now, well, the
011, right?
It's reported the designation's 001.
Yeah, 001, sorry. So that sounds to me like they're trying to integrate a female character in there. That's fine. I wouldn't have any issues with female agents, but I would expect that. Why would you have only male agents if you're a spy agency? You wouldn't have that, right?
No.
You'd want female agents for sure, right? But what I'm saying would be a huge problem is if they completely wiped away a male 007 and put in a female 007.
Yeah.
Only because the universe, which has always been based on, has had a male character.
I agree.
That's the only thing.
It would severely damage. It would damage the legacy, and it'd be the end.
How could
of
it be
series.
a Bond? How could it be a Bond?
Yeah, exactly.
A Bond movie. How can it be a Bond movie?
So I was kind of thinking and knowing about how the same production team has been for so long, all the way through Bond. I don't quite, and I'm sure Barbara Broccoli has come out, who's one of the head producers, has come out and says Bond will be a male. She's come out and said that, and she has been involved with her. That's her father's legacy, who bought the rights for the film all the way through, and the same producers at this point. So I don't sense that. I can't imagine. We won't know.
No,
again, I'm not a sort.
We don't know.
We don't know. But I find it unlikely that it's going to be messed around too much.
See, here's the thing, though. Unfortunately, there's been lots of examples and instances of movies or franchises that have been tampered with to support certain groups, right? But it's been at the detriment of that franchise, okay? And now it's become a bit of a easy thing for every movie that ever comes out that's of a major franchise for people to go, oh, it's woke, because we believe that it's a female agent that's a 007 agent. Whereas that might not have actually been true. Maybe the studio's intent was always to introduce a female agent who works alongside James Bond. Well, if that's the case, who gives a shit?
Yeah, no,
right?
I agree with that.
You know,
I mean, look, but that does to me end up being like a bit of almost another storyline, and I that would have to go off on its own tangent.
So what you're saying is now, it sounds like to me that they're deviating from the novels now quite substantially.
They ran out of the source material 2 decades ago.
Okay, so they can make up any old shit they want.
Yeah, but they still use
the universe.
Still use the universe,
Yeah.
and they still use some character names. The running title of this movie, Shatterhand, which was a bit of a weird name, but that's from the You Only Live Twice book, which was Blofeld's pseudonym name type thing. So they're still using bits all the way through. I mean, the movie's peppered. This movie is peppered with historical things. They've still got the Aston Martin
they
DB9
can't.
with the ejector sheet hole in the top.
Yeah.
On the footage I've seen. So
Well, it's like Star Trek, right? I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of Star Trek. I'm not, because I know that's going to deviate us from too much talking of Bond, and I'll be here for 300 hours ranting about that shit. But it'd be the same as taking away the Enterprise.
yeah.
So you could do it in theory. I mean, Star Trek has done that with Voyager. It was, the Star Trek universe, but Voyager was the main vessel. But what if it was, the Enterprise never existed? That type of shit, right? It's the same thing. So if you're going to Bond universe, you kind of want a Aston Martin as the car.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, another criticism, which I don't think is a criticism. I'm personally not a big fan of these things, but the Aston Martin is an electric Aston Martin.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't understand how that's really a criticism.
No, it's just
that's really silly.
Again, people have got very good reasons to be outraged with certain things if they really love those franchises and those movies and universes. But sometimes people can pick holes in absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And I personally couldn't care less if James Bond's now driving a hybrid car or a friggin' Toyota Corolla. You know what I mean? I couldn't give a shit. But did they suddenly change the core fabric
fundamental
of that universe? Did they do that? Now, a core example of that would have been if they had have come up and said to you, well, James Bond's now Jane Bond. And you're like, okay, I don't really care, but that's kind of messing around with the universe a bit. I don't know if I like this. You got a rant to talk about it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You got a right to talk about it. But I don't know if driving an electric car really gives you a right to rant about it. You know what I mean? I mean, Rocket Russell and I have ranted for fucking far more in terms of the Formula One, which is going down a Disney Park lane, but that's another story.
I don't know where you'll charge it. That's what I...
I mean, where do you charge? James Bond gets out of the car and he's like, oh, I got to stop here. I need to charge my car. Yeah. Please don't chase me while I'm, charging the car.
I think...
you know what I mean? Like, sorry, you know what I mean? Like, people can poke as many holes as they can before they actually see the movie and rant for rant's sake. And sometimes they've got a really good reason for that, because if it's been 100% confirmed that you're changing the fabric of that universe to a point where you're like, hang on, that's not in the spirit of the universe, that the universe is very clearly defined. Like, the Bond universe has got an advantage because there's been so many books. How many books were written by Ian Fleming? Do you know?
Oh, look, I don't know off the top of my head. It's got to be at least 15.
Okay, so there's quite a few books, right?
Probably less. I'm not super.
But there's quite a few books. So the universe has been well established by the original creator of it. Okay? So if you go and change that now, people have got a right to go, well, actually, we can refer to all the novels that were ever written by Ian Fleming, who was the original creator of this shit, and we're not happy with it, right? It's like Star Trek, same thing. It's been well created by Gene Roddenberry. We know about how that was created. We know the universe. Now you're messing with it. But when you're talking about electric cars that are the new norm, I don't get upset by that shit personally.
Yeah, I do. I wonder if they're taking note of what seems to be happening with a lot of these action-based franchises that seem to be, they're failing, aren't they? The movie comes out, the core of it's changing, and they're really getting hammered in the box office. The Terminator one, I know we've spoken
you're going to bring it up
about that, but that's dead, isn't it?
Yeah,
that is dead.
Well,
as a dodo.
well, you know why? Because not always. I'm not saying this about the Terminator movie because I haven't seen it. I've got no interest in seeing it because I know it's going to disappoint me. But quite often, these movies fail because the creators or the studios behind the movie have to put in their own political agendas or their own personal opinions into the movie. Because this is a rabbit hole, but, you know, movies have always been designed to subtly tell us about certain things like political agendas or political opinions. You know, a guy like Tom DeLonge who was in Blink-182, right? You know this
I've
story.
heard, yeah.
So he created...
I think this is pretty interesting.
He's created an organisation called To The Stars where he's a massive UFO believer, right? He dropped out of Blink-182 to create this organisation, and Rocket Russell and I have been, you know, trying to figure this out for so long now, how the hell he could do that, but he has. And his idea is to try and create media in some way, shape or form for people to consume so they can get used to the idea of UFOs and aliens existing, right? And movies have been doing that for decades, right? And so if you're a studio and you're a head of a studio and you want to create a movie and you really believe that you want to put in a particular opinion or something to just subtly tell people what you think, you can easily do it, right? You really can. I'm not saying that's what they've done for Terminator, and I'm not saying that's what they've done for, or they're going to do for Bond, but I think people are seeing through this shit.
Yeah, it sounds like the Terminator bit by killing, well,
see, you messed around with the universe. That's the problem.
The core bit.
That's right. So the problem with Terminator is
killing off that very important character.
That's
for
right.
Those who want to see it and haven't seen it.
But see, that's the problem.
Caused problems.
Yeah. See, here's the problem, right? Some of these franchises are really well established, like Terminator. Bond has got way more material than Terminator does because there's novels out there. It's been going since, the 60s. So when you come into a movie and you've changed the fabric of that universe to a point where 90% of the fans that are really invested in that can see straight through it, they're going to go bullshit. They're going to call bullshit, right? And that's the problem with Terminator. I think because that universe was always very much pivotal on one particular character, and they've done something to that character, 90% of people have gone, well, you've just killed this now. Because the very first movie you produced in 1984, James Cameron and everybody else, you've told us a story that one particular character is a very pivotal part of the future of this universe, right?
Key.
Is key. And if you know what the best thing is with fucking Terminator, if he dies, we're fucked. So what do they do in the new one? He's fucking dead. They pulled an Alien 3 on him, right? So you know in Alien 3, and we could talk about Aliens another time, how much we love that shit, but in Alien 3, two of the characters that we got really invested in, one of them we love, which was Hudson. Sorry, yeah. Hicks. Hicks, he gets killed, and so does Newt. But without any explanation. After the credits rolled, they dead. And you're like, what the fuck, what? And Ripley spent all that time in Aliens to try and save Newt, as well as, Hicks trying to, help her to achieve a goal. But within the rolling of the credits in Alien 3, they're dead.
They got turned into Poochies, because Poochie in The Simpsons, I don't remember, but that episode when they brought in him, then Poochie had to go away to space now or something like that.
You see what I mean? They've fundamentally changed the universe there. But Terminator is a really bad, like a really good example of when somebody's made a decision that's making that movie that we're going to take the main centerpiece of this universe that everybody... See, a simpleton can understand what the premise of Terminator is. Have to save John Connor because he leads the resistance against Cyberdyne in the future. And without him, we're fucked, right? Because we've come back in time and we're telling you this shit. Oh, he's dead. What? What have you done? So now that whole universe is unraveled. It's gone. And so with James Bond, or the Bond universe, and I don't know anything about this new movie, only from what nerds are raging on about, putting in an electric car to replace a DB9.
That's not so much.
It's not a problem,
no.
right? But if you replace Bond with a female agent, and her name is Jane Bond, I can understand why people get upset about it.
Yeah.
Right? But putting in a female agent to work alongside Bond, I have absolutely no problem with that. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I'm part of me is still looking forward to the next movie. Again,
You're a sucker for punishment.
I'm a sucker for punishment. I'm a fanboy. I'll hold judgment until it's watched.
That's all you can do.
I was disappointed by
all
the
you can
previous
do.
movie.
Well, that's it. All you can do is if a tidbit of information comes your way and go, you know what? If that turns out to be true, I won't be happy with that. But you can't, in my opinion, you can't rant and rave too much until you actually get confirmation from a studio to say this is what's going to happen.
That's right.
Right? And like I said, I've repeated myself a couple of times now. If it doesn't change the fabric of the universe, how can you get upset by it? Putting in an electric car to make, which is James Bond's new car, who cares? And to not have a Bond girl might be completely plausible if James Bond gets married, which he does apparently in this movie.
Yeah.
Why the fuck?
That's what they've.
So that's actually a good thing. You don't want James Bond to be temptation, like in The Simpsons. My wandering fingers, my wandering hands. You don't want him to go around and have fun with all these other women. He's married now. You know, like that's completely plausible, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is sort of a little bit against.
It is
what his character was. But anyway.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying though. But even if there was no, I can see somebody arguing against me on this because I can see their point of view. If there's no Bond girl, that is a change of the universe because pretty much every movie there's been a Bond girl, hasn't there?
Everyone.
Everyone's been a Bond girl, right? Maybe, I don't know, man. If he gets married...
He's been married before.
When he was married in that movie, what was the movie? Her Majesty's...
Secret Service.
So, okay. In that movie...
It didn't last long.
It didn't last long?
No.
How come? He found a Bond girl.
No, she was killed. Diana Riggs' character. She was murdered.
Well, I suppose you need to look.
Which brings back the brutality of the series.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, I guess a Bond girl on that point can work because he needs to find new love. He's lonely.
Well, again,
being a secret agent would be like
a secret assassin agent is
lonely business.
Lonely work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I can understand that, but it's very plausible if they write it well enough and they say he's married, right? Not having a Bond girl is plausible. I wouldn't cry over that, right? But I think people have got a right to be angry about replacing James Bond with a female character. Yeah, I really do think they've got a point with that. But
probably going to kill it.
I think they will too. Yeah. They will.
Yep.
And you know what? And the way around that is because, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, Ian Fleming never really stipulated in any of the books that 007 has to be male. 007 was just a number assigned to the agent that worked in, was it M5?
Well,
what was the agency, M5?
MI6.
MI6, sorry.
Well, Fleming's Bond is based loosely on his own stories because that's how he wrote it.
Oh, right.
So he was in the agency in Britain during the war.
Okay.
And so it's based, and a lot of his characters are based on people he knows, like the names of characters are based on people he knows. So, yeah, it's sort of his own interpretation of his own life.
Yeah.
To a certain point.
But you could have a female play that.
Oh, yeah.
You could, but if you did, right, I think the real fans of that universe would be like, what? That's not what James Bond has been.
No, I think you'll lose.
You'll lose a lot of people if you do that. But I have no issue with a partner in crime.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What's wrong with that? I don't know, because he's still there.
A Robin to his Batman.
Exactly, a Robin to his Batman. Well, that's another thing. What if, like Batman was, replaced with, Robin. Batman dies and Robin's now Batman. I think that's probably fucking happened, and people are going, actually, that did happen. In edition number 2 in 1965 or some bullshit. Some friggin' nerd's gonna be You're like, oh, no, you've got that all wrong. That has already happened. Who knows? There's too much. The rabbit hole's too deep with all this shit.
It's a very big rabbit hole.
It is. Are you satisfied with everything we've said about Bond?
Yeah. No, thank you. Thanks again.
No, man, I appreciate it.
I
was going to ask you a question, 2 questions, three before we finish up, very quickly. Favourite Bond?
Favourite, Sean Connery is probably my favourite Bond.
Okay, favourite Bond movie?
It's, oh God, I mentioned before. I've got a brain lab. It's
It happens when you do this.
The Spy Who Loved Me. Sorry.
And favourite Bond villain?
Jaws.
And can I ask you one last question? Do you think Pedro's a Bond villain? Because I do.
Actually, yeah. Now I've heard of the mysterious Pedro.
Oh, you know him. Don't hold out on me.
I cannot confirm. I don't want to confirm or deny that on the grounds I may incriminate myself.
But I think he's a Bond villain.
But, by the way, he's been sort of mentioned on this podcast. He could actually potentially be a very good Bond villain, sitting away somewhere in his lair, plotting against Retro Dan somehow, stroking a cat.
And
that sounds a bit weird.
And he's sitting there going, "I'll get you, Retro Dan."
Yeah, instead of just like in Austin Powers, Scott, whatever his name is, that classic line. He says, "Look, we can go kill him like right now. I've got a gun in my bedroom. I can just go and get a gun and shoot him." He'd be plotting some elaborate way of seeing your demise. Anyway,
I think that's exactly.
Shout out to Pedro.
Shout out to Pedro, the suppressive personality Bond villain.
He'd be a good Bond villain.
He would be. He'd be a great Bond. Because you know what he'd say? Lies.
Yeah.
All of it, lies. You know what? He'd have a machine.
I'll give you the red hot tip.
I'll give you the red hot tip. You know what he'd have? A machine that makes you say all sorts of lies. And then he'd have another machine, like a truth machine. So you have to tell the truth. But you know what the problem is that everything I say, Pedro, is the fucking truth.
Computers would be involved though, wouldn't they?
Oh, yeah.
Computers.
And you know what he'd do? He'd make the world wear T-shirts. I'm only here because my server's down. I tell you what.
And those headsets.
I'll tell you something about Pedro before we go very, very quickly, right? Speaking of watches, right? One day we'll talk about watches. We might do a podcast on it. Pedro buys a watch, a Tag Heuer.
Oh, yeah.
He spent a lot of money. He spent a lot of money on it, dude. I think it was a Tiger Woods one.
You're right.
And you know how much they are. They're a lot of money, right? They've got to be a couple of grand, a couple of G, I think. Anyway, he buys one of them and he's walking around the house with the watch on. And he's kind of like showing it off. And he says to me, "What do you think of my watch?" I said, "Well, your watch is fantastic. It's a couple of grand. But the clothes you're wearing wouldn't add up to $5. And on that note,
he's plotting.
He's plotting, man.
He's in the house. There is some elaborate map being built that will pull back like a screen, and it will bring up the music like that. There's plotting. He is plotting.
He's going to fuck me up. I'm telling you now. Fantastic, Phil. Thank you for coming in and telling me all about Bond.
Thanks, man.
I really appreciate it, man.
Cheers.
Jason, Relaxation, thank you for coming in and being you. Don't go or changing. Thank you, Richard. And I have to say that this has been one of the fantastic, most amazing podcasts that you've ever done. And thank you, Fantastic Phil, for your knowledge on Bond. It has been informative. Thank you, Jason, Relaxation. Thank you, Dad, for letting us use your garage. Thank you for the 2 people that have been listening to this bullshit podcast. I'm sorry about reading about fucking Bond. I can't help it. I wanted to be a spy ever since I was a little kid. It's a rabbit hole I can't get out of. I've secretly been plotting against the Russians for fucking ages. It's something that I need to get out of because it's going to get me into big trouble. And I'm worried about Cyberdyne. I'm sure they're going to get me too. Yeah, that's right. Google's watching. They're always watching. And until next week, my little plotting spies will have some more Atritum and more bullshit. But until then, you can roll it, mate.